We've presented previously on this module at a stakeholder meeting, and a sort of introduction and an overview has been given. I'm really hoping that people have had a chance to look at the draft that has been published, and very excited to hear what people think of it, because in drafting this module, the most important thing is that it does provide guidance for people and that it can be understood. And although I have a sense of that from some of the feedback we've received along the way, we really need your engagement now and your comments to make sure that this is something really usable. In trying to sort of put into context what does the master file mean, what is it for, I just wanted to say that competent authorities have a duty to supervise the pharmacovigilance systems of companies, and QPPVs have a duty to oversee their pharmacovigilance systems. The master file's got a number of objectives, and what the outcome should be that we can get a good sense of the state of health of the pharmacovigilance system from reviewing that information. It will allow competent authorities to run a proportionate and risk-based inspection approach, the best use of our resources being directed to where we see things that might require further examination. And I hope companies will see it as useful as well, in terms of directing their energies towards parts of the pharmacovigilance system that are at risk of not functioning in the way that they should. So we've got a module that is now published. We have a number of topics that are on the slide showing what's being covered. And I've just put a clarification note in there because for the herbal products, there isn't a requirement to describe the pharmacovigilance system in the application, but there will still be a requirement for a master file to be produced and maintained, so that if it's necessary, we can have an overview of the pharmacovigilance system applied towards herbal products. How do I move this?
Well, you speak nicely to the lady.
Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I want to tackle location first of all. Originally it was put forward that it would be the site of the QPPV. That has since changed, and at the moment it is in relation to the site where the main pharmacovigilance activities are performed. Now that's quite variable according to an organisation, a product. It could vary according to what activities are being undertaken at a specific point in time. So we've tried to write the guidance to work around that, but put a default in that if it's difficult to ascertain what that site would be, that it should be the QPPV site. And this becomes important when we're looking at the supervisory authority for inspections, because the master file location will drive the supervisory authority. So there's a little bit on transition here, because companies without a master file will follow the supervisory concept that we already have, which is the QPPV site, and that may differ for those companies that are coming in and under the master file system. But my main question here is you know, what do industry think should be the main criteria for governing the main site? What would you put into guidance there? Because we're trying to guess what might be suitable. Next slide, please. Just to give the overview of the concept, this is the sort of past, and it's been described earlier that we're not looking at a revolution overnight, so a lot of the guidance is written with the idea of where we will be after 2015. And the transition will be covered in other documents. But just to put this into context, currently we have variations for a detailed description of the pharmacovigilance system that are quite extensive in terms of the content changes that would attract a variation. And that is per marketing authorization. So there's a lot of activity there. Changes are proposed for the classifications guideline to support the implementation of the master file, but at the moment it's not it's not decided exactly what those changes will be. So we've put forward in the project group ideas for how we would like it to work. And to address a comment from earlier, we don't want it to be a situation whereby if a QPPV loses their mobile phone and has to change their number, that we get variations. We're trying to be very practical, but we haven't got to the end of that discussion yet, so I can't really tell you exactly what it will be what it will involve. But needless to say, the introduction of the master file will reduce variations, because there will be no variations associated with changing the content of the master file. If I can have the next slide. So as you can see here, the master file is kept up to date within the company, and it's at the point where it's requested by a competent authority that it would sort of physically be produced, if you like, and would need to be current at that time. Okay. The master file is also for a pharmacovigilance system and not per marketing authorization. So again, when we think about reducing the burden of producing and maintaining these documents, we should see some very big gains there. We'll only want variations currently for changes that are associated with the application, and that is the pharmacovigilance system summary. So based around the QPPV contact details and the master file location. Next slide, please. Okay. So our questions at the moment are, how can we optimize the use of the Article 57 database so that this information is supplied in real time and is maintained in an efficient way? And we've got lots of ideas of how to take that forward, but they're not going to happen overnight. And we still want to hear from industry where they think we can best use the information that will be provided as part of the Article 57 database to reduce some of the paperwork involved with the master file. As I said, the aim is to change the classification guideline and remove the need for variations relating to system change. So when a pharmacovigilance system master file is in place, we won't require variations. But the caveat there is that competent authorities still need information to assess risk. We still need to know about significant changes in a pharmacovigilance system. It can help us to sort of understand risk. It can help us to appropriately schedule inspections or postpone them if a company is in the middle of a large-scale change. So there may still be requests for some information. And this is partly the idea around having the change control in the logbook in the master file, and I'll come on to that in another couple of slides. Next slide, please. We've looked at early adoption of the master file. Not having to run a master file and DDPSs at the same time, and it being able to take advantage of this new system earlier than renewal or 2015. We don't really know to what extent that will be taken up, and whether the guidance is clear enough, or what questions you really would like to see addressed in the transition Q&A. So again, feedback on that one, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a little bit about how pharmacovigilance systems are represented. It's a relatively complicated situation. It would be nice to think that every company has one pharmacovigilance system and that's it, so one master file. But we know in reality that there are complex relationships between organisations where products are delegated into other companies' systems, that kind of thing. And we've tried to put in some guidance about how that needs to be represented in terms of identifying a system and what a master file's scope needs to be. But it is a difficult area, and again, we welcome feedback on whether there's more needs to go into that section. Next slide, please. With regard to the information contained in the master file, we've tried to be as clear as possible. This is another one around how much can we optimize the use of systems that already exist, and whether people would prefer more specific guidance in the form of a template on how to present this information, or whether companies would prefer more of a free system that allows you to use systems that are already in place in order to generate the content. I can see Vicky's nodding her head. But you need to tell us that, because some companies will want something very simple to fill out, almost like a checklist, and other companies would find that more difficult to do than if they were producing something themselves. Next slide, please. Okay, change control. I've anticipated that this is a topic that people would be very interested in. I do hear the mutterings as I go around in my other job. I've just tried to clarify that a little bit here. It is found in different areas of the currently drafted guidance. But we feel it's important that the QP and any partners know about significant changes, so we would expect those things to be logged. And actually, in answer again to a question from earlier, the QP is required to sign off and accept responsibility in writing for a master file. You shouldn't be in a situation where you're given responsibility for a master file without really knowing about it, and we do expect that the QP would sign off on that area. But there are significant changes that we would expect to see recorded in the form of a logbook. But then there are continuous changes that happen, such as updates to procedural documents. And the way the guidance is written at the moment is that those sorts of changes can be controlled and tracked in existing company systems. And if we wish to see the change control for that, we can ask for it. It doesn't need to be separately documented in a special place in the master file. You have to just be capable of providing it. Have the next slide, please. Okay, that's the same thing there. There'll be a history of changes in a logbook for significant changes. But at the moment, we would prefer to see records of change control at the point when we ask for it, and it not be something that has to attract a large amount of work to maintain it within the master file itself. But again, we'd welcome feedback. Next slide, please. So this is just in summary where we see some of the gains in the new system. That there's a uniform set of information, and it should serve the company, not just the competent authorities, as a tool for oversight and management of the pharmacovigilance system. There should really be less documentation, purely because there's one sort of controlled document and not several that may need to be changed at different times per marketing authorization. From the National Competent Authority's point of view, there won't be so much routine assessment of the system description as has happened with the DDPS. There will be requests to look at the master file. We're going to write in some ideas around when that might happen. It may be that a company that is applying for a marketing authorization in the EU for the first time, and we've never seen their pharmacovigilance system before, it may be that we would want to take a look at the master file then. Or if there are sort of innovative and extensive risk minimization structures around a product concerning safety, we may want to have a look then. It should harmonise to some degree the approaches to inspection and help with the risk-based approach. And we're hoping that the opportunities to generate content from existing systems are retained, so we're not adding in lots more paperwork, really. Next slide, please. So please tell me what you think. Feel almost quite relieved that it's been published and it's out there and we can start to hear, what you think. So, by all means via the consultation, but happily now, if you have something to say, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jo. So just because for industry, the pharmacovigilance system master file is very much on the radar screen. Perhaps for some of the other stakeholder groups here, in terms of headline, what we're talking about is a dossier, really, a file which each company will hold for either a group of products or all of their products, which documents that they have a robust pharmacovigilance system in place, and that then can be scrutinised by the regulators either by being sent in, or at the time of inspection the regulators can have a look at it, which will then outline all of the processes, the responsibilities, and so on. I thought it was very interesting that your opening point about this being a supervision tool that should support the companies, but also a supervision tool that will support scrutiny and oversight by the regulators. So I think that was a very helpful way of explaining what the point is. Also, the fact that you've put a lot of questions to stir up the consultation, I think, is also very useful. So, questions or comments? Just one from me. You know, those of you, well, most people in the audience won't know this, but there was in British culture, there's a TV program called Dad's Army. And in Dad's Army, you put something in on purpose to see if anybody will spot it. And in the final version that we went out to public consultation, there was a little tweak, and it was about the location of the pharmacovigilance system master file, which we slipped in just to see if anybody would spot it. And if I understand correctly, the very final version that's gone out to public consultation says that the location of the pharmacovigilance system master file will be either where the qualified person is located or where the main pharmacovigilance site is. It's a slight nuance on the second slide from Joe. So just to point that one out, we put that one in just to see that everyone was awake. Questions to Joe or relating to the pharmacovigilance system master file? Please introduce yourself.
Vicky Edwards from Abbott. Some comments really on the module. I think it is well written. I think it's very clear. I think it is in line with the implementing measures. So there were not a lot of surprises, but I think it is a huge ask. I think that companies are going to struggle to get this in place, particularly if you need to have one in place by July. And as I said earlier on, if you've got one product that qualifies either a new submission or you've got a renewal coming up in July, you need to have a master file in place by then. I think that the questions that Joanna has raised are those areas where we within FP have been discussing, perhaps having some comments and maybe some points of clarification. I am very pleased to hear that those issues that we raised this morning are already under discussion and being addressed, so that's very encouraging. I have specific questions, but I will probably keep those for the comments because they are specific to detail.
So I think that was more a statement than a question. But Joe, do you want to respond to any of the points raised, particularly about the work to be done to establish such a document?
Yeah, I do have some sympathy with the fact that it's something that's got to be put in place very quickly. I think it's another reason for not having a very strict template as well. I think you do what you can, and then you evolve it as best you can as you go on. I did want to say about just again to reiterate, the idea is really not to have parallel master file and DDPSs. If you've already got a master file system in place describing a system that has lots of products under that system, it doesn't make sense to have a DDPS for any of those products. And so the sort of process around that, I think, needs to be quite clearly elaborated. I think Florian said earlier that it will be voluntary in terms of discussing with a national competent authority whether you can adopt the master file. I know certainly from an MHRA point of view, there's no appetite to have the two systems running and to move over to master files as early as possible. But I've got it down as an action to find out whether sort of EU-wide, how harmonised we're going to be and how we'll need to manage that for the transition. So we'll look at it.
So the transition is very much on the radar screen, even if we haven't got all the answers today. Please.
So one more question. You presented a very pragmatic approach to the history of change. Is it safe to assume that we can also take that sort of pragmatic approach to other elements of the master file, where I think there are some requests in there that are impractical as they are presented, but would be doable in a slightly different way to achieve the same end?
Joe?
I need to know what is not doable and what's doable. It will be really helpful to know, because we need to set our expectations around what can be achieved. So I don't know that I can answer that without looking at the specific areas, but that's what feedback's for.
One example, the product list, that huge list, that it will be a big list, requires you to link it to your risk management plan and some of the key elements of your risk management plan, or to adverse events of interest, special surveillance activities for the product. The product list will most likely come out of a regulatory database, which will probably not have those elements associated with it. So to go in would be a manual task to go through and add those to a specific product list. But we could produce a list of risk management plans, products with risk management plans. We could produce a list of products that have additional safety activities that are ongoing. And we can maintain those lists, but to have it as part of that long list, I think it'd be more useful for me as a QP to have it that way, and for the inspectors.
That's why there's no template. Because if we start to put a template with columns for this and columns for that, then people have to do it in a very specific way. But as you've described, you can achieve the production of that information in a form of lists, but it may not be, one list that captures everything. So I think my answer is yes.
Yes, I thought it would be, but thanks.
So that's quite an interesting interchange. So it sounds like there's a moderate meeting of minds in terms of pragmatic and doable, and not putting requirements that are not manageable. But on the other hand, I suppose the flip side is this is a big change. So of course it is going to have some impact on processes and documentation within a company. So very useful immediate feedback. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I was wondering, is there a need for a master file separately for innovative medicine or advanced therapies?
Joe, so can I just put the question back to you? Do you mean in terms of a different structure to the master file, or that a company, if they have very innovative products, might want to have a separate file for those products? Was it the latter question? Do you see, Mike? Because there's people.
I didn't think you could actually put them all under the same heading.
Okay. Joe.
I might be missing something, but the way the file is structured, it says things like, tell us about your key processes for continuous monitoring of risk benefit. Those will still be requirements for innovative products or advanced therapies. The content of what you put in there may look very different depending on the sort of products in your portfolio. We haven't considered putting anything in additional or special for different types of products, but equally we haven't sort of mandated the content. We've just said that these areas need to be covered in some way. So I hope we've tried to be broad enough in what we've asked for, that it shouldn't matter what type of products you've got. You can still use that basic structure to provide the information.
But it raises quite an interesting conceptual point, and that's the difference between a pharmacovigilance system and a risk management system. At a very simplistic level, a risk management system is product specific, whereas a pharmacovigilance system is company specific. But Florian, without understanding that the decision-making process on the final implementing measures is ongoing, but the question is relevant to some of the considerations, I think, in terms of the scope, and you mentioned it, I think, in your presentation on interim measures relating to whether you could have more than one pharmacovigilance system within a company. Do you want to just reconfirm that or clarify that?
Yeah, you can have more than one pharmacovigilance system master files per company, but one pharmacovigilance system master file or one system should only be described by one pharmacovigilance system master file. So a prerequisite to have several pharmacovigilance system master files would basically be that you have different pharmacovigilance systems applied to different categories of products.
Please, sir, go ahead.
My name is Sasan Sarbdoran. I'm coming from Intramune, which is a small pharmaceutical company in the United States. And my question is about the location of the master file in our particular situation. As I said, we are a small pharmaceutical company that last year, almost the same day, we received the approval of our drug in the European market. And we are gradually penetrating to different markets in Europe. We have hired the services of QPPV, which is located in London, and our MAH address is also in London. However, most of the pharmacovigilance activities are done centrally in the United States. So reflecting back on your initial point about the location, where should be the location of our pharmacovigilance master file?
Just before I get to answer, which association hat are you wearing today, just for
I'm from Intramune, which is a small biopharmaceutical company.
And which of the associations, just for the sake of transparency?
Just Intramune, just a company. UCOP, right?
UCOP. Okay,
UCOP.
Thanks very much
Sorry.
indeed. So the SME organisation.
Yes.
Right. Joe, so very interesting example of first authorization, establishing a system in parallel with the marketing authorization. Sorry if I've read too much into at the same time as a marketing authorization application goes in. There was then a very specific question about where, but quite an interesting example.
It's quite a common example. It's not just small companies that would have this situation. We've looked at that idea that service organisations might be involved with companies that have not got an EU base, and that significant activities will take place outside the EU. The master file location has to be within the EU. If there is not a sort of main site within the EU, then the location is the QPPV, because that person has to be in the EU. That I think we've tried to be fairly clear on that. So I don't think it really makes a difference actually whether you're conducting pharmacovigilance in a huge other company outside the EU. There's still an option to provide an appropriate location.
So there needs to be an EU location, and on that, the pragmatic advice would be the QP location.
Thank you.
Okay, so just in the interest of time, any final burning questions before we move on to, we've gone from pharmacovigilance systems, we will be moving on to risk management systems.